Let's take a look at the differences between Pilgrims and Puritans. They have many similarities, and it is often thought they are essentially the same, but there are a couple of key differences. First of all, the main one being that Pilgrims were separatists. They wanted complete separation from the Church of England. They thought that that break was necessary due to the fact that the king was both the head of the church and the head of England. And therefore, this could lead to too much influence of one over the other. And they wanted more separation between the powers of church and state. Puritans, on the other hand, were non-separating Congregationalists. They believed that the Church of England was the one true church, and they were loyal to England, but not in the way they worshipped. They wanted all symbolic remnants that were left over from Catholicism to be removed from the church. That meant anything like altars, crucifixes, statues of the Virgin, they believed should be part of Catholicism, but not part of the Church of England. They believed that New England worship and practiced would be an example for Old England and the world to follow. Pilgrims were fewer in number. Only 102 sailed across the Atlantic on the Mayflower, and about half of them died the very first winter. Puritans, on the other hand, came in droves. They arrived by the thousands, and in fact, 40 to 50,000 eventually came, and by 1776, 75% of the American population were of Puritan roots. And so the impact they had that when they forged the American character is something that is still felt today. Pilgrims arrived earlier. In North America, they arrived in 1620, and the Puritans arrived later in 1629 and 1630. Pilgrims were poor. The Pilgrims, for the most part, were of a lower class, and not all on the Mayflower came for religious reasons. Some came for better economic opportunities in the New World. Puritans, on the other hand, were wealthier and were primarily upper middle class, and so the reasons for them coming here would be more religious as opposed to pursuing better economic opportunities. Pilgrims were generally not terribly well educated. The Puritans were. In fact, over 100 of the first Puritans to come to America had been educated at Oxford or Cambridge. That's a high percentage of educated immigrants. Within 6 years of landing, the Puritans founded the first college, Harvard, in Cambridge, right outside of Boston. Famous Pilgrims included William Bradford, William Brewster, Miles Standish. Puritans had a lot of guys named John Endicott, John Winthrop, John Rolfe. It was the most common name, and in fact, in white European society here in America, still the most common name today. Pilgrims settled in Plymouth, whereas Puritans settled in Salem and Boston. Ultimately, though, both colonies united to form Massachusetts following the Puritans having their charter revoked in 1689. So a quick review. Pilgrims were separatists wishing to separate completely from the Church of England. Puritans believed that the Church of England was the one true church but needed to be reformed. Pilgrims were fewer in number. Only 102 sailed on the Mayflower, and about half did survive the very first winter. Puritans arrived by the thousands, and by 1776, about 75% of Americans traced their roots to Puritans. Pilgrims arrived earlier in Plymouth in 1620. Puritans arrived later in Salem and Boston in 1629 and 1630. Pilgrims generally were of a lower class or a poorer class. Puritans were generally upper middle class. Pilgrims were not generally well educated. Puritans were typically very well educated. Pilgrims settled in Plymouth, Puritans settled in Salem and Boston, but ultimately, in 1689, both colonies were united when the Puritans' charter was revoked to form the Royal Colony of Massachusetts.